destitute widower risked everything to protect a young woman in a small frontier town, an act that shocked every onlooker. The midday sun blazed over the dusty square of Lakewood Springs as the sheriff called for the final bid of the day, a 19-year-old daughter whose parents, worn down by years of hardship, were letting strangers decide her fate. Some townsfolk shifted uncomfortably, others watched with unsettling curiosity. Isaiah Montgomery, a 42-year-old widower and the only black landowner in the county, stood at the back, fists tight. The girl on the wooden platform kept her eyes on the ground, a fading bruise visible beneath her tangled hair. A tavern owner offered $25. A volatile farmer shouted $30. That was nearly all the savings Isaiah had set aside to keep his farm alive, but he raised his voice anyway. $50. The square fell silent. Dozens of white faces turned toward him, stunned. The sheriff hesitated, but Isaiah met his gaze. The law allows any free man to bid, he said evenly, unless you plan to tell a federal judge otherwise. The bidding stalled. $70, going once, twice, sold, the sheriff declared, his gavel echoing like a gunshot. Murmurs of outrage rippled through the crowd. As Isaiah stepped forward, memories flooded back. His late wife Abigail's humiliation in this very square, the lonely years since her passing. Up close, he saw more bruises on the young woman's arms. She never lifted her eyes. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Collins." "I'm Isaiah Montgomery." "I know who you are," she said, surprising him. They left under a storm of hostile stares. A voice jeered from the tavern. "You paid plenty for something you can't keep, Montgomery." Isaiah ignored the taunt, guiding Sarah toward his wagon. She trembled, not from him, but from memories of all she had endured. "I won't harm you," he said quietly. "You have my word." For the first time, she met his eyes. In them, she saw the same quiet resolve that had kept him alive in a world eager to break him. "Why?" she asked. He waited until the horse started forward. "Because I know what it's like to be treated as less than human." As the wagon rolled away and the crowd's whispers faded, no one noticed the small metal object Sarah hid inside her worn shoe, or the brief, knowing glance she exchanged with a figure watching from the shadows. There was far more to the quiet young woman than anyone in Lakewood Springs could guess, something that would change the town's destiny forever. If stories of hidden courage and defiance move you, stay tuned. Sarah's desperate escape and Isaiah's bold compassion are about to ignite a chain of events no one will forget. Isaiah's cabin sat 6 miles from town, tucked between dry fields and a stand of oak. By the time they arrived, twilight had turned the landscape a deep indigo. Sarah studied everything with sharp, calculating eyes: the weathered house, the small barn, the stone well, and drought-stricken garden. She measured distances, silently mapping possible escape routes. "It's not much, but it's mine," Isaiah said as he climbed from the wagon. "No one will bother you here." She stayed on the wagon, cautious and ready to bolt. "There's a room in the back," he added. "It locks from the inside. It was my son's." The mention of a child made her pause. "My son Jacob died 2 winters ago," Isaiah said quietly. "Pneumonia. He was 5. Inside, a lamp already glowed on the table, as if someone had been there moments earlier. Sarah stiffened. "Wait here," Isaiah said, scanning the house. He returned a minute later, relaxed. Ruth was here. She left food. "Ruth Wilkins? The midwife?" Sarah asked. "You know her?" "She helped my mother," Sarah replied, giving nothing more. The cabin was simple yet impeccably ordered. Books lined makeshift shelves. A cedar table shone with polish. This was not the home of a broken man, but of someone who refused to surrender. "You plan to run tonight, don't you?" Isaiah said during dinner, his voice even. Sarah froze. "I wouldn't blame you," he continued, "but 3 armed men are patrolling the eastern forest, bounty hunters hired after a group escaped the Sullivan estate." "I'm not a fugitive," she shot back. "No," he agreed, "but try convincing them of that in the dark." Morning light found the cabin empty but the door unlocked. She wasn't a prisoner. Through the window, she spotted Isaiah in the garden, coaxing life from dying plants. While searching for supplies, Sarah discovered something unexpected: a federal law book covered with notes and letters from a Boston professor. The sound of hoofbeats broke the quiet. 3 riders approached: Frank Holloway, Walter Schmidt, and a tall stranger with a polished smile. Isaiah set aside his hoe and faced them squarely. "Montgomery," Holloway said with forced friendliness, "meet Judge Davis, our new county magistrate." The judge inclined his head. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm updating property records. We're inspecting holdings for suitability." "My taxes are paid," Isaiah replied. "It's not about taxes," Schmidt said with a thin grin. "Unproductive land can be reassigned for better use." "This land has been lawfully mined since 1869, Isaiah answered evenly. "Times change," Holloway chuckled. "So do laws." When the men finally rode off, Sarah turned to Isaiah. "They want your land." "They always have," he said, returning to his work. "Why?" "It's nearly dead from drought." Isaiah hesitated. "Because there's something here worth far more than a few dry acres." Later that day, Ruth Wilkins arrived in her covered wagon, formidable and clear-eyed. She brought seeds, supplies, and urgent news. "The new judge visited 5 properties today," she said, examining Sarah's fading bruises. "Everyone owned by black families or immigrants?" Isaiah merely nodded, as if expecting it. Ruth handed him a sealed envelope. "This came by telegraph," she whispered. "Jenkins asked me to deliver it quietly." Isaiah read the message, his expression hardening into resolve. "Sarah," he said, his voice low but firm, "I need to know everything you overheard at your father's meetings with Mayor Marshall." Sarah's surprise lasted only a heartbeat. "How do you know about that?" she whispered. "Because you're not the first young woman we've tried to help escape that household," Ruth said gently. In that moment, Sarah finally understood. Isaiah hadn't stepped forward at the auction out of random pity. The small, ornate key hidden in her shoe suddenly felt as heavy as iron. "My father keeps a red ledger locked in his desk," she confessed at last. "It holds payment records, names, dates. Mayor Marshall is planning something huge, something with Judge Davis and the land by the river." Isaiah and Ruth exchanged a sharp glance. "So that's why he was willing to cast you off so publicly?" Isaiah asked. Sarah nodded, a single tear escaping. "I've heard too much. I've seen too much." Rumors raced through Lakewood Springs like dry grass fire: the black landowner who dared to shelter a white girl, mysterious night visitors to his farm, the railroad line that would soon connect the county to newly discovered mines. No one noticed the missing red ledger from Mr. Collins's desk, or the late-night coded telegrams. But those deemed invisible often see the clearest. Revolutions rarely begin with shouting. They start as quiet plans, whispered in the dark by people with nothing left to lose, only a future to claim. Days after Judge Davis's inspection, a storm rolled over the town. Amid the confusion, a small cloaked figure slipped behind the town hall. Sarah Collins, whom everyone believed confined to Isaiah Montgomery's farm, was inside the very seat of local power. The key in her shoe had found its purpose. Meanwhile, Isaiah strode into the telegraph office, rain-soaked. Jenkins, the operator known for his quiet sympathies, simply nodded. "The line to Boston is open," he said, leaving Isaiah alone with the clicking machine. By morning, the sun blazed over a town on edge. Mayor Marshall, Judge Davis, and 3 wealthy landowners gathered at Holloway's Tavern, voices low and urgent. "What do you mean the papers are gone?" the mayor hissed. "The cabinet was locked," Judge Davis muttered, tugging at his collar. "Only you have the key." Frank Holloway poured another drink. "What about Montgomery?" "I always said he was trouble." "Impossible," Marshall snapped. "He'd never get into City Hall unnoticed." What none of them realized was that, at that very moment, 6 fresh copies of the stolen documents were already posted on the doors of the church, the marketplace, and City Hall itself. Ruth Wilkins, calm as ever, carried out the task as if delivering bread, revealing the mayor's scheme to seize prime riverfront property before the railroad's official announcement. When the church bells struck 10, a special train pulled into the station. 3 men in crisp suits stepped off, a representative of the Continental Railroad, a federal officer from the Department of the Interior, and a reporter from the Boston Globe. Isaiah greeted them and led them toward the growing crowd. Gasps spread as citizens read the evidence from the infamous Red Ledger. "It's a forgery!" Mayor Marshall shouted from the tavern door. "Fabricated?" the federal officer asked mildly. "Including your signature on every page, or the map showing how you plan to divert the railroad for personal gain?" Walter Schmidt tried to slip out the back, only to find the sheriff blocking his path. "You knew?" Schmidt demanded. "Not everything," the sheriff replied, "but enough to stand aside." Faces that once turned away from Isaiah now looked on with a mix of shock and new respect. Then came the final revelation. Sarah emerged from the church beside Reverend Thornton. "This young woman," the Reverend announced, "risked everything to bring us the evidence of crimes that touch every family here." Her father arrived, eyes blazing. "You!" he growled, stepping forward. "I wouldn't," the federal officer warned. "Your daughter has already provided testimony about how you and the mayor forged property documents for at least 7 families over the past 2 years." A telegram was handed directly to Judge Davis, its contents about to seal the fate of every conspirator. The reporter from Boston cleared his throat. "The Massachusetts Bar Association is eager to learn," he said, "how a man expelled for misconduct in one state is now sitting as a judge in another." "You can't do this," Mayor Marshall hissed, eyes darting for an escape. "This town belongs to me." "Belonged," corrected the railroad representative. "And the Continental Company wants to know how our confidential plans were leaked in the first place." What followed was chaos carefully chronicled. The mayor's failed flight, Holloway's desperate confession, and officers removing the infamous Red Ledger from the Collins home. The square fell silent when Sarah confronted her father. "You sold me," she said steadily, "just as you sold this town's dignity." Cornered, Mr. Collins lashed out. "What did you expect? Your mother left because she couldn't bear the sight of you. You were never worth the air you breathed." The crowd recoiled. Isaiah stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "Every soul here is worth exactly the same, Mr. Collins. That is the truth you tried to bury. There is no price on human dignity." As the conspirators were led away, some citizens demanded swift justice. Others, who once would have shunned Isaiah, now sought to share in his victory. Few noticed the quiet exchange between the railroad representative and Isaiah, or the federal officer inspecting Isaiah's land deeds. Fewer still saw the knowing glance Ruth and Sarah shared when the reporter asked for an interview. The question whispered through the dispersing crowd was the same. How had a black landowner and a young woman once treated as property brought down the most powerful men in Lakewood Springs? The answer was written in those public documents, in the letters to Boston, and in a plan set in motion years earlier, when a determined former slave and a forward-thinking professor began a correspondence that would change the course of a town. 6 months later, dawn broke over a transformed Lakewood Springs. The railroad station, once a mere bargaining chip, now stood tall on the edge of Isaiah Montgomery's land. Far from being seized, his acreage had become the hub of the new commercial route after engineers discovered that the mayor's preferred path crossed unstable ground. Beside Isaiah's modest cabin, a schoolhouse bustled with life. What began as informal lessons for 3 children barred from the city school had grown into an institution drawing families of every background. Under a broad oak tree, Sarah Montgomery, once Sarah Collins, taught a class of 20 black, white, and immigrant students. "I never imagined I'd be a teacher," she said one afternoon, watching the children laugh and recite their lessons. "I used to keep my eyes on the ground." Isaiah, sanding new tables for the classroom, smiled. "I always knew you had fire inside you. You just needed room to breathe." As for those who once ruled the town, former Mayor Marshall served time for fraud and extortion. Judge Davis fled under cover of night, but was later arrested in Chicago under a false name. Frank Holloway lost his tavern to creditors and labored now as a river longshoreman. And Mr. Collins, disgraced and avoided, wandered the outskirts of the very community he had tried to dominate. At the weekly supper that gathered the small circle who had remade Lakewood Springs, Ruth Wilkins brought a final piece of news. "We've had a reply from Professor Benson," she said. The Boston academic who, years earlier, recognized the legal brilliance of a self-taught former slave and quietly advised Isaiah to purchase the very land everyone once dismissed, had written to congratulate them. The seeds of justice, planted in letters and quiet resolve, had at last come to full bloom. Ruth's eyes shone as she read the telegram aloud. "He accepts our proposal to expand the school. 15 full scholarships for local students." 15 lives transformed, Sarah murmured, fingertips brushing the faint scar on her wrist, a mark from a past that now felt like another lifetime. The very next morning, the first commercial train steamed into Lakewood Springs Station to an eager crowd. At the small dedication ceremony, the new mayor, an honest merchant chosen in a special election, spoke of progress and renewal. Yet the crowd's attention kept drifting to the Montgomerys, standing quietly to one side. "It's thanks to you," an elderly woman whispered to Sarah. Months earlier, that same woman had turned away when Sarah passed on the street. "My son just got a job at the station. They would never have hired a boy like him before." Her son, smiling in his crisp railroad uniform, waved from across the platform, his shorter leg no barrier to pride. "We didn't do it alone," Sarah replied warmly. Later, as the evening sky burned orange, Isaiah and Sarah walked home. "That's what many people don't understand about justice," Isaiah said. "It isn't only about punishing the guilty. It's about building something better from the ruins." Sarah paused, looking over the glowing town below. "When I stood on that platform, treated as if I were for sale, all I wanted was revenge," she admitted. "I wanted everyone to feel the pain I felt." Isaiah nodded, listening. "And now?" "Now I know freedom isn't just breaking chains," she said. "It's creating a table where everyone has a seat." "They tried to convince us we were worthless," Isaiah added softly. "That you were just a commodity, and I was an intruder. We proved that our worth was never for sale." On the horizon, the new station towers blazed against the setting sun, a symbol of prosperity shared by all. In the schoolhouse, maps and books promised futures unimaginable only months before. And in City Hall, once a nest of corruption, a diverse council now met each week to plan improvements for every resident. Neither of them could have guessed that a single act in a dusty square, a black farmer stepping forward to buy a young woman to save her life, would spark a transformation reaching far beyond Lakewood Springs. The real revolution, Isaiah often told his students, isn't tearing down walls. It's building bridges where there were once only divides. Sarah echoed the lesson to each new class. They tried to break us. But sometimes broken things reflect light in ways that whole ones never can. If stories of social transformation, courage in the face of injustice, and the triumph of the human spirit move you, subscribe to the channel for more narratives that celebrate an enduring truth. A person's value is never defined by a price tag. It's defined by the strength to stand, fight, and believe in a better world.